What's up, Patreon? This is Carson, aka If Found. I used to do like video breakdowns like this on Twitch and YouTube a few years ago. It's been a while, so I'm a little rusty. If I end up missing anything in the breakdown, feel free to please comment on Patreon. Commenting on Patreon is probably gonna be the best. My eyes are mostly gonna be on that. I'll be sure to either amend the video, like re-upload, or I'll just tack it on as another post and make sure to include that in the next video upload. I'll be doing these once a month for all of my create and artist tier subscribers. So I'm gonna try and do them on a regular schedule as well, so you know when they're coming up. We're also gonna be doing like polls and stuff, so you'll be able to decide which songs you want me to break down. For this first one though, I am gonna start with Die For You, which released it about 2 years ago. It's not really a sound I'm doing anymore, but I do think there's a lot of production techniques in it that are applicable to music I'm still doing now, applicable to a lot of different genres, honestly. They're just kind of like foundational production techniques that I think you'll get a lot out of. I'm gonna be editing these videos. Even though these are long form production videos, yeah, I mainly wanna save you time because I know what it's like being busy. We all got a million things going on. Go into a lot of detail, but try to focus on the things that are most important. Again, if I'm missing anything, let me know. We'll get it knocked out. All that being said, let's get into this thing. So here we have Die For You.
Entombed in my mind, can't seem to break away. Lost in time, thinking about better days. Do you ever get...
So that's the verse. For those of you who are not too familiar with the song, this is the drop. That's pretty much it. Second drop is more of a melodic one. We have this.
Tell me why you left me bleeding.
That's it. Melodic dubstep, pretty standard. Heavy rock influence, or like, yeah, pop punk / rock. I'll start out kind of top level or high level, why I have things grouped and organized the way I do, and then we'll kind of go in section by section of the song and look at each individual or each like core element. So like the guitars for verses, the chords for verses, such like that. So high level, why is my project organized this way? I like to do drums, percussion at the top, and then I will group everything based on style, like type of sound. So for me, all the hits or the percussive type of things are all grouped in drums and percussion. Drums are separate from percussion, and the way that I designate those is drums is kind of like your core drum sound. So your snares, your kicks, hats, anything that would be like on a drum kit, basically, as well as your like main kicks and snares for the electronic side. Percussion is going to be more things like Foley, orchestral hits, top loops, things like that. If it needs to be sidechained to the kick and the snare, I can have it in that separate group so that I can have that freedom to do so later. Then I've got vocals, pretty self-explanatory. Anything that's a vocal, whether it's supporting vocals, leads, whatever. Guitar, chords, and leads, all color coordinated as light blue, but the reason behind that is basically like all the core melodics of the song that aren't vocals. Bass, for this is like mid bass, so basically anything that contributes to like a bass sound, but that isn't the sub, obviously. And then all my effects. So this is all like your swooshes or your sweeps, risers, exhausts, you know, ambience, textures, things like that. So all of this up here you've probably have seen before. You even organized your projects this way. This, however, you may not have seen. So what I like to do is I like to submix everything into 4 buses or submixes, if you will. And this is called a Brouwer mixing technique. Mix A is going to be all of the hits, so like drums, percussion, anything of that nature. So if I listen to this, we've got essentially just our drums and our percussion here. And the way this is set up, for those of you who aren't that familiar with Ableton or haven't used it this way before, creating your audio track and then go, say I want to do 235, send it to there. So it sends that there, and then I just gotta make sure I put that as in, so that audio track knows to look for incoming audio. So that's how these buses essentially are set up. And again, think of them as like sub mixes. So mix A has got all of my drums and percussion. Mix B has all my melodics. So this is anything that contributes to the song that isn't a vocal, a drum, or a sub. As you can see, all these are going to, they're sending to B. In mix B, I have my bus B. And then I have sidechain. So this is also in these these sub mix downs is where I do the sidechaining as well. And this gives me more control over what to sidechain and how to sidechain it. So for mix B, for instance, if I want to have the sidechain a little bit shallower on the melodics as opposed to the sub, I can do that here. And so I just have a separate MIDI track, which usually follows the drum pattern for the drop. And then I'm using Shaper Box, which is again MIDI controlled. It's reading that MIDI channel. And just doing volume automation with Shaper Box. It's more transparent, it's cleaner. Compression or sidechain compression is also a good technique. It's a staple in dance music. It's a little less transparent. You have a little more artifacts when you do it. So then I move on to mix C. Mix C is gonna be the vocals. And then as you can see on these sub mixes, I also have like essentially a mix down for each sub mix. So it allows me to kind of, like I said, do some more effects and more creative things with certain sections of the mix. Mix D is gonna be my sub. And then all of this, mix A through mix D, gets then sent into our premix, which is another sub or another bus, if you will. And this is gonna be like essentially the mastering chain. And the reason why that I like to do the master on this like sub mix is because I like to do all my metering here. So I don't want anything on this channel. And the reason why is, say if I want to pull in a reference track, if it plays now, I'll see like it'll be unaffected playing on the master channel, so that I can actually like look at my meters and compare reference to my song, what's happening in the project, right? I'll go through the mastering chain and all that towards the end of the video. So this is a trick that I don't really use anymore. Crazy trick, which is like breaks a lot of rules, but I would take the exact same drop drum. So I would take all my basic drop, right? So kick, snare, super simple. I would take that exact same group, same processing, everything, literally copy paste here. So we have the same thing, but it's not going through the processing. So this version is going through, it's all getting routed through mix A, which then goes to premix and then goes out. This is sitting parallel to that entire processing chain. So it's just the raw drum samples, if you will. What it allows me to do is it allows the drums to kind of have more of that punch and that like liveliness. And they're essentially sitting on top of everything else. It, in theory, sounds like it would break the whole mix. And in some ways it kind of does. But if for this particular style of music, it works. Like dubstep rhythm stuff in general. If you want really loud punchy drums, this is a cool way to do it. So here's an example without it, right? So you can hear how like once I add them in, it's crazy, like it just makes the drums really pop out of the track. Now, because the transients are so tight, and all of this is just going straight into Ableton's Clipper. I tried it one day, I thought it sounded cool, so I stuck with it for a little bit. And when we get to other video projects, I'll show you what I'm doing currently, which I think is a little bit of an in-between of like what you're supposed to do and this method, which is not what you're supposed to do. We'll start out with the drums and the percussion for the beginning. We got the drums and percussion. I'm gonna hold just the mix A. So as you can see, drums were very simple in this part. Noel and I agreed that we wanted to keep the drums really simple in the verse. Damnboy's songwriting and his vocal performance was just really good, so we wanted to let that shine. Super simple. For my acoustic like what's it called? Rock sounding drums. I always use Easy Drummer. I just feel like it's, I don't know. I mean, I know a lot of people use either the Travis Barker samples or there's a bunch of different stuff, but Easy Drummer to me is like, it's really easy to program with it. The sounds are great, and they have a bunch of different, like, I think they're called Easy X's, basically like add-ons or additions that you can download, purchase and download, and they're like 50 to 70 bucks each, and you get new drum sounds with it, and they also come with new patterns and programs and stuff like that. I've used these particular drum sounds for like 4 years now, and they just work. They're some of the best sounding ones on the market. The nicest thing about this, what makes it sound so good, is the variations of hits that you have in the MIDI, right? So I think this illustrates it really nicely. So basically this is just a pedal hat rolling, right? And then I got it opens up here and there. But what's nice is for this one hat, you've got all these different hits, right? And they all sound slightly different. More closely mirrors like what a real drummer is going to do. There's going to be variation to the strike angle, how hard they're hitting it, the timing of it, things like that, right? So all of that is taken into account, or a lot of it, most of it is taken into account when you have these variations in MIDIs that you can use. So like different tones of hitting that cymbal, right? Or hitting that hat. And so I like to just kind of play around and alternate it. And that way it gives it a little bit more of a real feeling. And then the kick and snares, obviously, like, I think for the hats, they're pretty on time. They're pretty gridded. Like, I think I kept them pretty quantized. But for the kicks and the snares, I moved them a little bit off grid just to give it a little more of that realistic, like, human feel. And that snare just sounds great. So again, Easy Drummer 2, amazing. Let's listen to With and Without Processing. So a lot quieter, obviously, but a little decap, analog saturation, essentially. A and E are my two favorite modules to use. A is like a little bit more transient. The transients kind of cut through a little bit more. E rolls it out or rolls the transients off a little bit more, but has a better tone in my opinion. So I like to use E. RVox, I don't really use this plugin anymore because, to be honest, fuck waves. But it's a nice general all-around compressor. You know, it adds volume to things, smooths them out. It's nice. I use it here and there, but we've got a little spectral shaping just to kind of tone in the 2.7, the like piercing section of the spectrum, like at 2.5 to like 5K. So just reining that in a little bit. So subtle, but context it helps, especially helps the vocals kind of not get drowned out by the drums. SPL Transient Designer, this is just a transient shaper, but it's great. It's probably my favorite transient shaper besides ST4B, which I don't think I was really using at this time, so it's probably not on this project, but this one's great. Still use it today. Big clipper, basically just doing some hard clipping here. We want to retain the transients, but we want to add a little bit more like meat to it. So yeah, just kind of squashing those drums a bit. Glue compressor is probably just to pull a transient out. Yep. So nice thing about glue compressor, it's a great plugin honestly, but if you just turn the attack all the way up and make it slower essentially and the release faster, it's going to latch onto more of the tail of your drums, and it's going to allow the transients to kick through. So it's going to essentially make your drum sound a little bit more transient. And percussion, this is pretty much like, this is going to be orchestral hits, Foley, things like that, right? So some Foley hits or orchestral hits, and then Foley. So all the percussion, it's not really adding to the groove, it's just reinforcing the groove. And this is a big point I'd like to make, or that I want to make, is keep, like, as much as you can, keep the productions as simple as possible. The core idea should just be exactly what you need to accomplish the goal of the music, right? And if that goal is like something pop punk oriented, a simple pop punk beat will suffice. You don't have to get crazy and creative with it. Where you get creative is not in the drum programming it per se, but more so in the reinforcement of that programming. So like drum loop, right? Super simple in context. Just works. Allows the vocals to shine, allows the palm mutes of the guitar to do their thing. Percussion, not adding anything else really, but reinforcing what those drum hits are doing. So, you know, little orchestral hit, kind of hitting with the kicks, this layering with the hats. And it's just an organic texture really. The actual processing on this, super simple. A little rule of thumb that I like to do is for verses, like if you want to keep enough headroom for the vocals and everything else so it's not like too messy at the top end, I like to roll things off at like 2,500 hertz. So I'll take like a sharp roll off, put it at 2.5K, and I like to do around 2.5K because it sounds more textural to me. I think when you get like above that, like 5-6K, it's a little bit more like high end, a little hi-fi sounding. This sounds a little bit more like gritty textural. So that's just like a cool little trick I like. Drums kind of open up in the chorus. But all pretty simple, you know, just standard drum programming. I've listened to a lot of pop punk and rock songs, so I just kind of mimic what I listened to growing up. For the, let's look at the guitar, like the melodics. So the processing on this, I will show in another video because it's not in this project, but nøll did the guitar, like the intro guitar, this loop, and I processed that in another project. And then I did the rest of the guitar, if I'm not mistaken. So I think I did the bulk of like everything else. For the actual chords, we're just doing like a simple stack. So I don't have the piano in here, but we've got this Omnisphere patch. Unfortunately, I no longer have Omnisphere, so all these, I can't really show you which patch I was using, but it's simple stuff. It's pads you could find probably in Ableton Native. This is kind of like an icy, colder sounding pad, kind of spooky, a little more bell oriented with like some of that reversed reverb sound, and then a little drone. Yeah, so this is, I like to do this in the verses. It's like a little harmony, or not like a harmony, like a just a melodic hit, like a bell sound or whatever, just like on the root note or the fifth or something like that. It just kind of adds a little bit more interest every couple bars to do something like that, just to kind of keep it moving, you know, because otherwise it's just kind of, I don't know, kind of stagnates, you know, subtle. And then in the effects, so in the sub, simple, I think it's just a regular sub. Yeah. It's like a, I think it was a saw-based like pluck sub thing. That was like low passed. For the effects, I've got a bunch of atmospheres. This vocal atmosphere. And typically for my atmospheres, I like to keep them pretty simple. I'll find stuff on Splice, and usually I'm not making stuff from scratch for vocal or for atmospheres. It's just faster. You get your idea down faster to just do them, just kind of go off of what other people have made, combine them in a certain way, and then you have your own little like vocal atmosphere, or like atmosphere soup, which sounds unique and, you know, works. So like, you know, just throw a reverb on it. It's a cool little sound, right? I think it's like part of a bigger atmosphere, but that is like a little kind of thing that just comes in during the atmosphere. I still will make my own from scratch occasionally, more so in sound design sessions, but if I'm on the like fly and I just need something quick for the song, this is the method, in my opinion. Something like this, little like glitchy vocal or effects, something that just kind of ear candy, stuff that pushes the instrumental forward. And then we get into the chorus. Main change here, we've got the guitar just kind of goes into these palm mutes. We drop the loop that we had from Nøll. Mainly we just have these little palm mutes. And as we go through, kicks in, and then we pick up. So again, all this is like secondary percussion. So we've got some cinematic effects, things like that. A lot of it is splice loops, but just stuff to kind of fill out the build drums a little bit more. And then we've got some build percussion itself. Mix of a couple different loops. The little thing. We've got a build snare. Basic processing on here. Just kind of like brings it up to the front a little bit more. Tell me why you left me bleeding. Now we'll kind of look at the drop. Before we do that, we'll look at the build effects, standard transition effects here, nothing crazy. Little sweeps. Some of that continued atmosphere, and then some risers. I don't do this as much anymore, but I used to stack a ton of risers. Like I'm talking like sometimes 5 to 7 risers in one go. I don't really do that much anymore. I try to keep my stuff simpler, but that's what's going on here. We're just kind of building up, and then we have another little riser sweep here. And then going into the drop, we've got so let's look at the instrumental here. So some interesting things to note. We've got this guitar swell. Basically the way that I made this, it's a feedback effect that I just recorded by holding up the pickups of my guitar up to my speakers and just turning it up really loud, and then kind of palm muting and doing like a little harmony or something like that. And basically the way you would do it with an amp and a cab, but I just did it with my speakers. And then record it as an audio file. So I had this really long audio file recorded, and then I just picked out the parts that I liked. This is from the same audio file but stacked, but it's a more dissonant swell, so we get something like this. Kind of this cool beating effect, right? So drop guitar. We've got that here. Yeah, and then I'm automating the on-off of the channel. I don't do it this way anymore, but this way worked for this project. And then you have your power chords. And then I'm just doing like a wobble thing. But I think I'm doing that here actually, yeah, LFO tool. So just automating that in and out. And that comes in when the dubstep part comes in, like that part there. Essentially the drop is broken down into a call and a response. You've got so I'm just doing call and response there, right? Chords. So I've got a basic super saw sound. Just like this saw stack that I don't really use anymore, but it's essentially like 3 silents and a serum. And each silent is like its own little preset. So it's nothing crazy. You know, it's not the best saw stack, but it worked for this. They all sound pretty similar, I'm not gonna lie, but it worked for this. So, you know, this is the more unique layer, the thing that kind of helps it fill out a bit more. This is actually, I made this from a tutorial from AU5 like 2-3 years ago. And it's essentially a super saw, but using chaos modulators to make it even more random and more noisy. So kind of harsh on its own, but in context with everything else, it helps kind of open things up, right? So just kind of beefs it up. And then we have the leads. So a basic like 3 lead stack here. We have just a little like guitar sound, which is essentially just a basic triangular wave or triangle wave in serum, nothing crazy. And then running it through a fat rack, which this rack should be included in one of the racks I have coming up on Patreon. An amp and a cab sim from Ableton. You can kind of tune these to taste. Soothe to kind of knock out that 4 to 5K area. It gets a little harsh after the amp and cab sims. And then some EQ and compression. But yeah, you get this sound here. Kind of sounds like an electric guitar. And then we've got this. Super simple. It's just got a little bit like a pitch modulation, like wobble on it. Give it some more expression. Fat rack, more saturation and compression. Wide synth, and follows the same principle as the super saw stack, right? Like you've got something that's more mid-heavy, cuts through mono, and then you have a layer that's more wide, detuned, and kind of fills it out. So altogether, like you would have this, and without it, and then with it. So you can hear how that kind of opens up quite a bit. You've got Noll's fill in the drop, which is sick. And this just thickens that up. Same idea. And then we have that was the call, right? And then you have the drop, or the response, sorry. Did this in Vital, so let's see if we can get it to work. Hold on, let me get this smaller. So this started from a preset, Volta preset, sorry, it's a Volta preset. And I tweaked it a little bit from there, threw a fat rack on it, and got this. Then what I did is I printed it out, and you get this, right? Just a little bit more processing on it, a little bit thicker, a saturator and clipper and stuff like that. But what makes the drop essentially is cut that up and you get this. So a little bit more unique and a little bit more like flow to it as opposed to just like a so a little bit like, I don't know, it just felt cooler to me. So we went with that, and then I like, you know, automated the volume of that and stuff like that, or clip gained the volume down so it had a little bit more dynamic to it. And then also when this hits, I have this other sample here as like a layer. So together you've got without it. The core idea was pretty cool, but then how do you take it up that next level in quality? And really just playing around. I mean, printing to audio and then cutting stuff up and reorganizing and arranging is such a shortcut and such a cheat code for this stuff, because trying to do all of that in MIDI would have been a nightmare. Like, I'd have to figure out which parameters to automate, and then, you know, automate them just right and play with the automation until it sounds cool, where it's like, as this, I can just print it out as one long audio strip, cut it up, and it's just so much more visual. I can see immediately how I'm chopping it up, how I'm affecting the dynamics, and then I can so quickly just like layer in new textures and tones, and just put it in a group and, you know, go from there. I do have a bass layer. So for the call part of this, it's you know, just a regular like mid bass, a noisy saw bass essentially, a little bit low passed, just so it's not so noisy. Because like, something to keep in mind here is supercells already have all those high mids. So if I were to just take this out and then do, actually, where is it? Here. We don't need all that because supercells are already doing that. And then in the response, this guy right here, which is probably a preset. Yeah, it's a amplifier preset. And then it's just kind of like popping in here and there to layer with this guy. Just a little bit more thickness going on, not much. Just kind of rounds it out. But then you got this as well, as like an additional layer with that Must Die sample. So that's pretty much that. I mean, the sub for this drop, simple. I like to keep my subs as simple as possible for the most part. More modern stuff, or the newer stuff I'm doing a little bit more with the subs, but for this, you know, a simple sine wave almost always suffices. I'm doing a wobble to match that like response to this right here. You know, so for that, I'm just doing an LFO tool. Basic sub sine, used to be called hip hop sub, I think, in like Ableton 10 and earlier, but it's a great sub. It just works well. I do have a sub rack that builds on this and does a lot more, in my opinion, that I'll be including in the Patreon. Little sub drop. That's just doing serum, and I think I just built this myself. Yeah, just doing a little envelope modulation, pitch modulation. This is essentially, this macro is modulating the coarse pitch of the sine wave, and then I am drawing in the actual pitch envelope myself. Just gives me a little bit more like flexibility there, as opposed to trying to do it in the envelope and then modulating coarse mode with, or coarse pitch with the envelope. I can just draw it in Ableton with a macro knob. So swell, basically just the sub bounce to audio, and then I just reverse it here and there. All right, so we got that little stutter, right? There's a bunch of different ways you can do this. The way I did it is I used a thing called beat repeat, which is built into Ableton. Here we go. I put it on the, remember these are like my sub mixes, so I put it on my mix B. So what I'm doing is I'm just automating this repeat button. So basically it just like freezes it. So it freezes a 16th loop, which the grid is like your loop size. Freezes it in place and just keeps repeating it. There is a delay on this, so it doesn't do well with latency, meaning that if you have a bunch of like high, like CPU intensive or high latency plugins before this plugin, like in your chain, so say I put like I don't know, like if I turn this Pro Q3 to a linear phase EQ, for example, like it's 0 latency, but I do linear phase, it's gonna be a shit ton of latency. That's gonna change the way the beat repeat processes, because it's gonna scrub like a delayed part of the audio. It's not gonna sound right. So just keep that in mind. It's kind of finicky because of that. And then doing a little bandpass too, I think. Yeah, right here. So it's just like a phone filter bandpass thing. And I like to do that like in the middle of the drop. It's like a fill, you know, you just kind of bandpass it out, it all drops out and it kind of comes back in. So and then it bandpassed while we had the sub drop going. So it's all about push and pull, in my opinion. Like that's what creates dynamic, it's what creates tension, creates energy in any music, but especially in electronic music. It's not about how loud and how heavy you can go. It's about the dynamic of that push and pull between heavy and light, and noise and no noise and stuff like that, and noise and silence and stuff like that. You know, little effects and stuff. You know, if I did not have it in there. Like little things like that. You know, these are all last 10% stuff in my opinion. The bulk of it is what I've already showed you. These little effects fills are like, I've listened to the song 100 times and I'm like, okay, how can I make this 1% better? It doesn't break the song, doesn't make the song, but it kind of adds quality and production value, if you will. So I always keep that till the end. Like I'm not thinking about that during the writing process. This is like, you know, I've worked on the song 20 times. What could I do to make it better? In general, I like to keep the energy up in second verses. So kind of let it breathe. Little delay throw on the vocal. And back in with a more upbeat drum pattern. So for the chords, leads, and guitar, it's pretty similar as the first one. There's like one extra part here. But I won't go over the guitar chords or leads for the second verse because like I said, otherwise besides that part, they're pretty similar. The vocals, we'll look at vocal processing for this one though.
Love
see what we did.
So you still in my head. Someone come save me. Bloodshot eyes, can't sleep, I'm rotting in my bed. Even the drugs don't faze me.
Alright, so by the looks of this chain, I did the majority of the processing actually. Because it's a pretty semi-heavy chain here. We got lullabies of you still in my head. So I did a declick pass. So basically just take out any clicks from the raw file, bounce that out here because it's pretty CPU intensive. And then all my processing is on the group. And that's just because we had different like vocal lead takes that I wanted all to have the same processing, so I just grouped them and start out with a DS. So in general, I want to start out with either an EQ, a de-esser, or like a gate, one of those three things. And you're just kind of doing cleanup on the vocal. Normally I would do an EQ first. I didn't, which tells me that this would probably already EQ'd a little bit, so I didn't have to do any like cleanup EQ, which is like low cuts and stuff like that. So I got my de-esser.
Lullabies of you still in my head.
Taking a decent amount out of that like 10K, 8K, that S area. Then 2A, this is like goes on pretty much every single vocal I ever mix. The LA 2A is just classic, sounds amazing. Opto compressor that just can do no wrong in my opinion, especially on vocals. What's great about this thing is you can hit it pretty hard. As you can see, like the vocals are decently dynamic. I probably could have done a better job of clip gaining these, to be honest, to clean them up. And I'm doing that here in certain parts where these are just like S's, where I'm manually de-essing the S's. So I'm like clip gaining going in, I clip out the S's, I gain them down, and then I do a crossfade to make sure they don't click. I could have done a better job doing that, because you can see how dynamic it gets right here, which we want it to be dynamic but not that dynamic, because it's going to hit the compressor harder and push it, make it work more than it needs to. But that being said, you can hit these optos pretty hard. So then I'm going into a channel strip. Again, I typically would have this the other way around. My channel strip, which is going to be all my EQs and stuff like that, as well as some analog like saturation, would be before the 2A. I'd be doing that tone shaping before the 2A. In this case, I did it after. We got the SSL 9000J, great channel strip.
Lullabies of you still in my head.
So
Lullabies of you still in my head.
So just kind of taming those low mids. I got like about dB and a half on them, and the lows 3 dB. 300, it was just like too stuffy, so I just kind of took some out of the 300 and the 500 and added a little bit more presence at the like 4.5 5K. Tiny bit of high end, and then I'm doing some, this is like the analog distortion, if you will, or saturation. So I love this plugin, is this THD knob, and it basically just gives you a little bit of like texture to it. And then after, another round of de-essing. Usually I will do 2 to 3 rounds of de-essing. Just depends on how much correction needs to be done. In this case, I'm doing 3 rounds. I've got the de-essing, manual de-essing with clip gaining, 1 round before the 2A, 1 round after the 9000J. RBox, you know, self-explanatory. Pro Q3, which is kind of just doing, again, a little more taming, more of that 2.5. This is a very tricky area with vocals. This is like the sweet spot. Well, actually, I would say like this is the sweet spot. But you really want that like 500 to 3K, maybe 5K, but 500 to 3K really to be like, it needs to be magic. So I spend most of my time there. When you're starting out, you'll spend a lot of time here and basically on the outskirts or on the fringes. So your lows you'll correct, your highs you'll boost, because you're like, I want this to sound expensive. So you just boost the hell out of the highs. It makes it sound thin and weak. It doesn't make it sound hi-fi. So what you want to do is focus primarily, clean up obviously in other places, but focus primarily in your mids. That being said, like some of my EQ moves here are a little notchy, right? Like this is a relatively sharp move at the 2.5, but this is more corrective. And it's just because he had a lot at that 2.5, 3K area that was kind of bothering my ears. So, you know, if I take it out. Lullabies of you still in my head. Lullabies of you still in my head. Some vocals, it takes a dB of reduction to get it right. Some it takes 10. It really just matters on the person's unique vocal characteristic. A little bit of fresh air. It's just like high-end shelving essentially. It's not, and a little bit of saturation. It's like not doing much. Then I've got my reverb, delay, stuff like that. So this is my vocal effects chain. I usually put it in a rack, and then I run it in parallel, and I can mix in how much I want of each. And so I'll automate the amount of reverb, the amount of delay, things like that throughout the song. So as you can see, certain parts of the song have more or less reverb, depending on when they need to be. Delay, also automated in and out. Para is my parallel saturation chain. So with this, I've got a Saturn II, I've got an inflator, which like wave shaping essentially. I have this SPL transient shaper. So it's not really like adding any attack, it's actually taking away the attacks and adding sustain. So it's kind of like just a compressor really. And then throwing that into an 1176, great plugin. Kind of like the 2A. I don't think it's an opto. You can push it really hard. It's definitely a little bit harsher sounding than the 2A, which is why I have it in parallel. And then wrap it all up with a Pro L2. So that was just the leads, right? And then I've also got lead processing for the chorus. I cried for you. So I also have the backgrounds, right?
for you.
So I'm not going to go into detail on every single one of these because the process that I showed you for the lead is the same for this. It's tailored to these, right? Like I'll change some things up, like the EQ will be a little bit different. Like I'm dipping out more of the lows because I don't want the presence here in the low mids. I want that saved for the leads. But the same idea, right? Same process. You've got the 2A, channel strip, de-essing, so on and so forth. Just things are tweaked to match what the backgrounds need. We've got some gang vocals.
Someone come save me.
That is actually me. So that was just recorded into my phone and then I just processed it a bunch. Like if I take this out.
Someone come save me.
So yeah, you can just record it into your phone and make it work. It's a background element though, right? Like it's not main vocals.
In my head, someone come save me.
He's got the high part, but it's not like a scream. It's not like a shout. It's more like a falsetto and a low part. When I was listening to this and I was producing, I was like, okay, shit, it'd be cool if there was like a gang vocal here. So I recorded this.
Someone come save me.
And then in the back half of this one,
Even the drugs don't faze me.
we leaned more into the gang vocal and I had Alvin or Noel record this.
Even the drugs don't faze me.
Yeah, so basically he just 3 or 4 times recorded that in his phone, I think it was. Yeah, and then we just processed it. And that's pretty much that.
Even the drugs don't faze me. I don't think you understand. I
And that stacks with my stack, obviously.
Even the drugs don't faze me.
That's pretty much it for the vocals. The writing for this was interesting because I think this came about when we had our second to last session together. We had the song pretty much done, but we were like, okay, we want to do something, one more special thing for the breakdown before the last drop or the last build. And so we changed the guitar or the progression around and treated it almost more like a bridge, like you would in a rock or a pop punk song, right? So different progression. So you get that second layer that comes in there. Yeah, we were stoked. We were stoked as hell on it. Like we were like, all right, that's definitely the progression. Because when you listen to the progression with what damnboy's doing, it's just like a really cool building thing, right? You get this rising progression, and then it drops, and then it all comes in, right? On the root note, the tonic there as well. So it's just cool. It's just a really cool progression that we were really stoked on. And then you just launch into the melodic drop.
Tell me why you left me bleed.
And then this is all really simple. I'm not going to spend too much time on this part because it's really just power chords, supersols. That's the bulk of it. So we've got power chord 1. And then another layer. Basically just like an extra little harmony in there. And then bottom line, basically the root note of the progression, I'm just playing it on one note or one string. Second half of the drop, we come in with some palm mute stuff. With that, it'd be like, and that's just following the melody of this alternate melody that comes in, right? And those are just octaves, so just like, you know, I think it was probably, I don't know, 5th and 3rd string, like they're just the octaves on it. Pretty standard pop punk stuff. And then to reinforce that, we've got the supersaws. And then so the way I'm getting that sound, that like tape stop and all that, I think I'm using the kilohertz tape stop. I am. So it's like a little tape stop effect. So I'm using that whole saw bell thing. So just utilizing some of those leads from the first drop. And this is that like omnisphere chorus thing. I can't show you the patch, but any choral sound will probably work for this, to be honest. Since I didn't cover in the first drop, let's cover the drop drums real quick. We'll start with the top loops because they're quick, they're simple. It's essentially like 4 or 5 different loops that I just layer together. So, bunch of different splice loops, layered them together, and then I put them all into a group and process them. So doing some fresh air and soothe. I would say that if I were to remix this, I would probably take this off and roll off the highs a little bit, because as you can see, it's like it's pretty harsh. Like that's a pretty harsh like high end right there. It works, I think, in context of the song, but it's a little much. Typically, I would opt for fewer top loops just because it's a little noisy, but you know, that's what we went with for this one. Main drums, this is the more interesting part. We got this little metal hit, which is, you know, like a nice little harmony on what's going on with the guitars. It's also a nice metallic hit. Neat main drop drums. I'm doing a company kick for this one, it looks like. The processing is next to nothing. I just beefed up the low end, added some transient shaping and some clipping. Nothing crazy. The snares. So this is a dubstep snare I made a few years ago. Added this layer. So I got this. And then we've got this one other layer, which is like and then I added this other layer, it's like a beefy lower end. And then together you got this. So it just kind of gives it that like low end, right? This is like the tail. So all together you've got. And then, as I said before, we had took the same group, so this drop drum group, we copy paste it and we put it over top of everything. And without it, but with it, and you know what, I mean, you could definitely argue the drums are too loud with it, but it's, I don't know, it's cool. It really pops out. I feel like it definitely goes off live. Like, the people respond to the drums, especially if they sound good. So if you spend time getting your drums sound good and you want to put them on display, like that's a trick you could use. And then you've got the fills coming out. Fills here, again, using that Easy Drummer 2 that I mentioned earlier. Little cymbal roll up here. We're just modulating, or not modulating, automating or pushing up the velocity, so it just rolls in. I try to get the bulk of the mastering done in the mix, so that the mastering stage I'm not doing a whole lot, it's just kind of polishing. So as I said before, mixes, we had the submix with A, B, C, and D. On these is usually where I'll throw a clipper, I'll throw some EQ, but it's really just cleanup EQ. So like I only want the sub or low frequencies coming from mix A and mix D, which are my sub and my drum groups. Every little bit helps here. What I'll also do is during these builds is I like to throw on like an endless smile, and it just helps kind of, so I'll do it here. Just a little bit, basically acts as a low cut, just kind of pushing it up a little bit. But what's nice about Endless Smile, automate one knob, and I can change the tone of that riser by just doing the different presets. So that's why I like One Smile. It's quick, it's easy. This is how I sidechain my my instrumental, essentially to my vocals. This is the other benefit of doing these sub mixes, right? Like I don't want to sidechain my sub to my vocals. When my vocal plays, I don't want it to duck my sub, and most of the times I don't want it to duck my drums either. Sometimes I do, but most times no. So in this case, I just put it on the melodics bus, which is my mix B. And every time the vocal plays, so right here, right? But yeah, you can see the red waveform here, spectrum, is the vocal mix. So that's pulling, I have it sent in as I showed you here. So sidechain coming in is V mix, which is this guy right here. It's my overall vocal mix. So I have the Pro MB, which is essentially a multi-band compressor. And I have Go Expert, looking at external sidechain, which again I have routed from vmix, and then I just kind of dial in. The reason I like this is I can decide where I want it to sidechain, right? Like I don't want all of it, like I don't want this to be done. The bulk of that like presence of the vocal is going to be that 500 to 3K, so I'm looking at like getting around 500 to 6K in this case, and then you just dial this in per song. But it's nice. It just gives it a little bit more room in the vocal. It's subtle, but it definitely helps, especially when you send all this to a compressor in the mastering chain. So this is my mastering chain, as I mentioned earlier. And let's open this up. We've got a Pro Q3, essentially doing cleanup work, taking the low mids and making them mono. So like that, or it's like the lows actually. Basically 150 and down, I'm cutting all the side channel. So just want mono content down there, taking the lows and rolling them off at 20 Hertz, and then also rolling the highs off at 22K. Nowadays I'll put that to like 20K honestly, but this is what I'm doing here. I almost always will run a Pultec on my master chain. And it just sounds great. It's an amazing EQ. You can do a lot with it and you won't break your mix. Usually I like to do this little push-pull technique where you boost the lows at like 30 Hertz, but then you also attenuate a little bit, kind of like squeezes the lows. Pretty much always we'll also do a high shelf just to kind of shine it up a bit. Again, you can boost the hell out of this thing and it's very forgiving. It's not going to break your mix. In this case, I'm boosting the mids quite a bit, so I've got a peak 1000 Hertz, like 3 dB, doing a dip around 300 just to kind of clean up those low mids, so it's a little bit, and then a peak at 3K. I don't use this anymore, but this was like my go-to for years. Just a mix bus, like master compressor. Sounds really good. It's got a soft clipper built into it that sounds amazing, and just a great way to squeeze the mix a little bit. Mastering grade harmonic saturator. And I know I'm going fast on this. I will do a separate video dedicated entirely to mastering, because it's like an hour, 2 hour video in itself, honestly. It really opens up your mix. The whole point here is to try and make your mix feel a lot bigger and wider without breaking mono compatibility. Not that that matters as much anymore, but it's still important to keep in mind. So depending on what you're listening on, you will hear that, but it is subtle. Like I said, these are like 1 to 2% moves at this point, or basically just a clipper that I'm doing with Ozone. So it's sending all that into a clipper. Then I have additional, so I'm gonna have multiple stages of clipping here. Then I send it into a parallel clipper / wave shaper. So I've got it like -8 dB, whereas the dry is -3. So send that to a clipper to control it, and it's hard clipping. Then all that goes into this plugin, which is a beast of a plugin and deserves a video fully on its own. I'm not going to go into detail on it right now, but this deserves its own video. Basically a selective band mastering grade compressor. Not multi-band, but selective band. Basically what I'm using this for is to compress the low end and really control it and bring it up in a controlled fashion, so that it's not blowing out the rest of the master. Then we go into a clipper, another stage of hard clipping, just a little touch. So if you look at it here, 2 dB max of reduction. Then we send it with the tube and tape saturator plugin that I think I mentioned earlier. Basically just tube saturation emulation. I have the tape part of this off, and then I'm increasing the lows a little bit to give me a little bit more beef on the low end. That's pretty much there. So I'm just doing the tube with a filter, and that filter is pre-tube. So this pushes into the tube, which will change the way the harmonics react. And then I have final clipper, essentially limiter. And then I'm doing this stage of limiting, which I don't think is doing much. It's doing a decent amount. So I've got like 2.5, 3 dB almost there. It's quite a bit because I'm also sending it into one more limiter. You know, almost 3 dB there as well. So if I were to remaster this one, I wouldn't do it this way, but it works for this one. So maybe one day we'll go through and I can compare what this would sound like if I were to just do a simpler mastering chain with just clipping. It'll be louder, a little bit harsher, but I would think a little bit punchier. So that's pretty much it for Die For You. This video is long as hell. I'm gonna, please give me any feedback you can on it, what you're looking for future videos, how I can make these videos better, because ultimately these are for you. I'm used to doing them more in a live stream format, so if you guys would rather that way it's more direct feedback, like, hey, show me that, check that out. I could do that, right? I'm cool with that. We'll figure this out together, make sure you get the most bang for your buck. But yeah, that was Die For You. I hope you learned something. I will see you in the next one. Peace.